So, you want to be a real estate investor, but where do you start? How do you know what information and sources to trust? That's where I come in. I'm Jonny Cattani, and this is the Investor Relations Real Estate Podcast. Hey guys, real quick, before we start, go to investwithcattani.com and download my free ebook, Is Commercial Real Estate Recession Proof? Now to today's show. What's up, guys, and welcome to another episode of the Investor Relations Real Estate Podcast. I'm your host, Jonny Cattani, and today I'm joined by John Crossman. John is an accomplished business and real estate executive, speaker, and author with a flair for transforming organizational go-to-market strategies, as well as outperforming sales goals for leading companies, including Crossman Company and Trammell Crow Company. Currently, he provides consulting services to executives, organizations, educational institutions on building and sustaining success. As a collaborative team builder, he inspires all stakeholders and champion diversity, delivering results for customers, colleagues, and community stakeholders. John, welcome to the show.
Oh, well, thank you. And thank you for saying all those nice things about me. That's so kind. Thank you.
Absolutely. It's obviously a very awesome career you've had so far. I'm excited to get into it. But as we do with all the guests, let's kind of rewind and start at the beginning and kind of give us your journey from, how you got into all of this.
Sure. Well, so if you want to understand me, it's important you would start with knowing who my dad was. And my dad was a pastor and civil rights leader. And so growing up in the environment I did was pretty unique. First off, when you're a preacher's kid, you grow up in a household that tends to be an educated household. My parents read books and had sort of that kind of component. And then number two, we were a household that was very community minded. My parents were protesting and they were standing up for different issues and really leaning in hard to those issues. And I was raised around that. And of course, part of that, the environments that I grew up in were very working class. And they were very, very, very diverse. Sometimes you meet people who were never exposed to diversity until they went to college or in the workplace. And I grew up in a heavy diversity environment. And so that was a really good thing for me. I always tell people that, I grew up in an educated household, a visionary household, and a not a lot of spending cash household. I used to say I grew up in a poor household. My mom, she watches everything I do. She's like, stop saying we were poor, John. So shout out to mommy. We're working class, maybe not poor, but I was the kids that had birthday parties at McDonald's were rich. So what I always tell people is that I became a devout capitalist at a young age. I saw my dad making real impact with not a lot of resources. And I wanted to work in a job and work really hard to be able to make a lot of money, and not because I wanted to have a ton of things as much as I really wanted to make big impact. So I didn't know this until my 40s, but I'm dyslexic. And so when I went to college was really hard for me. I was always kind of embarrassed about that. I graduated with a 2.9 GPA and I never skipped class. I went to every study hall at every tutor you could possibly imagine. Like, that's as high as I could go. And I sort of always had shame about that. I was always kind of, felt bad about myself. And then grad school was never really an option for me. I just hit it and started working. But again, all that stuff really worked to my advantage because maybe work harder, maybe lean in, do extra stuff. And then once I really got established in a career, then I really wanted to do some things to give back and help the community. And that's where I am today. I have kind of a balance of those two things. I'm still doing real estate stuff and doing things to try to be of service and a resource to people.
Awesome. I love that. That's such a great story and definitely a unique story, right? Kind of the atypical story to all of this. So obviously you're still in kind of a business role in those things. We're talking off camera. You're now getting into kind of the passive side of things. What is it about this side, that the passive side, that was so appealing to you?
Well, I think part of it is I've always liked a new journey. I always, whenever I've done stuff, I really wanted to master it. But then I always felt like I wanted to kind of go on and then add on another skill set. And so I started out as a leasing guy and then became an investment sales guy. And then I ran a management leasing company. And so this was another step. And I will tell you, it's so funny. I'm learning stuff. I mean, I'm in a new space. Again, you were talking about camera because I need your great wisdom and counsel advice on raising equity. That's a whole new thing. And at 50 years old, I'm doing something new and exciting, and I like that. I also think it's cool. I'm really trying to do more of pushing other people out. getting them in front of the camera, getting them in front of the press release. And there was a big awards thing for brokers the other day, and somebody called me about it. And I said, that time's passed for me. I need to be doing this other stuff, and other people need to be getting those awards. Other people need to have their careers elevated. They need that. I need to be doing more support things for those people. So I just think getting older and progressing and getting new roles, for me, that's been invigorating, exciting.
Love that. That's so awesome. Never stop learning new things. Never too late to get started. For those listening, start right now. Now's your sign. You wrote a book, and I love the title very much. Career Killers, Career Builders, the book every millennial should read. Shout out to millennials.
Absolutely.
So let's talk about that. How did that come to be? What is it about, that you felt inspired to write my generation a book?
Well, let me first off say this. I love millennials. And I think there are many things millennials are better at than my generation, better than me at. And one thing we could talk about in my journey, when I was around 42, I ran track in college, and I got into running again. And when you get older, you can't sprint, so you do 5Ks and distance runs. I was doing a lot of that, winning my age group to being a competitive person. And one time I ran a half marathon, and I ran my fastest time ever, and came across the line, and I did not feel good. And I remember looking at the ambulance that was there and thinking, maybe I should go talk to them. And I didn't. And then about 2 days later, I just was kind of overwhelmingly, and I went to my doctor, just walked in, no appointment. And the nurse was walking me back, and she goes, I think you're suffering from depression. And I was like, what? John Crossman's the happiest guy in the world. And so I did get diagnosed with clinical depression. And it from a health standpoint, it was the hardest, most difficult, most painful thing I ever went through. But in the recovery of that, which it took a year to go through it, I had to take Zoloft and Klonopin and all this stuff, lost a bunch of weight and all those kind of things. But as I got through it, in my recovery, as the years have gone by, I had to learn the language of feelings. I had to learn the language, that skill set. And so that's a long way of saying that, people in my generation don't really understand that skill set, and a lot of millennials do. And I've been guest lecturing at colleges for over 20 plus years. And a couple of years ago, I was lecturing at college, and at the end of the lecture, a young lady came up to me and she said, "Thank you for your humanity." And I really appreciated that comment. Later that day, I saw a friend of mine who's a retired bank president, and I told her that. And this retired bank president, she looked at me and she goes, "What the hell does that mean?" And that's a very big generational divide. So right. I wanted to say to you first up, it's there are things millennials do better, in multiple categories that I look at. So I find them inspiring and helpful. So let me just say that. The second thing about why I did the book. So I do all this lecturing at colleges, and a lot of times I get asked to lecture about, real estate investments or the history of retail real estate, things like that. And years ago, I was thinking to myself, man, I don't know that I need to talk to kids about cap rates or amortization or stuff like that. They get enough of that. What is the message I could send to students that they're not hearing? And in that process, I started thinking through, if I'm lecturing at an outstanding university, and a lot of outstanding universities across country, these kids, some never made a B their whole life, right? And so if they're 21 years old and you sort of go forward and say, when they're 31, they should all be superstars. And this, some will be in jail, some will be dead, some will be addicts, some will be, so I started processing, gosh, what does it mean? How does some become superstars and some don't? You and I'm sure in your life, you and I, if I just, let's name people that's shocking that they didn't skyrocket, right? And so here's one, Anthony Bourdain. What in the world, right? How does a guy have a job that's I bet you in your friend group that he had the dream job, right? Right. Traveling and eating and talking to people. He killed himself. Kate Spade. We could go on and on. If you Google celebrity suicides, you just can't even believe it. How does this happen? So I wrote a speech called "The Top 5 Ways to Get Fired" and "The Top 5 Ways to Keep from Being Fired," and really diving in. And I'm not talking about being late or dressing inappropriately. I mean, really big, yes, that is going to ruin your career kind of thing. That lecture became my most popular lecture. I had these classes of students, they would call me and ask me to give that lecture and not talk about real estate. And one time I gave a lecture and it was a 45-minute lecture. And I kid you not, I was 90 minutes in the Q&A. I finally at one point had to said, I have to sit down, guys. Like, I can't stand here. Like, help me. Because I talk about mental health, and I talk about addiction. I talk about recovery. I talk about seeing a therapist, seeing a psychiatrist. And again, could my generation handle that conversation? Probably not. Kids today, millennials and the younger generation, they can. It doesn't mean they're perfect. That thing's going to work on, but that connectivity really will help to kind of ramp up and explode that book.
Wow. That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that story. I really appreciate that. As someone who struggles with anxiety, I can certainly relate. Anxiety and depression are pretty relatable, in the sense of, one can kind of lead to the other and so forth. But anyway, so I empathize with that and totally understand. So I guess talk about now, let's kind of get into what are some of those, the 5 killers and builders that you kind of outline.
Which one would you want to talk about? You want to talk about a builder or a killer? Which one?
Let's start with the killers. Let's start with the bad news, then we'll go to the good.
Well, I think that one of the bad ones that jumps out to me is pride. Pride is what kills careers, it kills marriages, it kills relationships, it kills all kinds of things. And so when we talk about the builders, the opposite is like being coachable. And being coachable is not just taking criticism well, it's actually seeking out criticism. Mm-hmm. And then really being able to own it and being able to listen and then being able to apologize. What's funny is that one of the things I've been really reflecting on the last 2 years, this is a very recent thing for me, is what is intimacy? How do we have intimacy, a healthy intimacy with our coworkers? How do we build trust with our coworkers? And one of the ways we do that is through healthy confrontation. We really can't be close to anyone, a spouse or a business partner, unless we are able to confront each other and be heard in healthy ways. And honestly, I've had some reflection, and I've done some apologizing to some people the last couple of years where I feel like I violated their trust because I didn't listen well. Like, I think now I reflect, oh man, they were really trying to tell me something. They were hurting in some way and I wasn't hearing it. And so I really try to really get deeper in those conversations. So we think about pride as a killer, right? Like, I always assume myself, like, let's just assume everybody's smart and works hard, right? But yet some people's career ends, but pride. And then the opposite side of that, coachability, listening, trusting, those 2 opposing skill sets.
Yeah, I mean, and you really nailed it. So many great points there. Really kind of, sort of the cliche death, the ego, being vulnerable, all of those things really go hand in hand, because that's what allows you to be coachable, right? That's what allows you to be like, okay, I actually don't know what I'm doing, but here's someone who does and has my best interest in mind. And then you kind of, open that space up and construction criticism is not, derogatory, right? You're not putting someone down. You're just saying, hey, this is something you can improve on, do better at, that kind of thing.
Well, and let me just add on that real quick is there is a sense of what is the motivation of the person that's criticizing you, right? Sometimes a parent can be criticizing out of fear, and that doesn't necessarily mean that criticism is helpful. Sometimes you could have somebody in a work environment, they're criticizing you because they're jealous, right? So you do have to have discernment, right? And of course, even if somebody's criticizing you with an unhealthy motivation, it doesn't mean that criticism isn't helpful, right? So that can still benefit you. But you do need to have discernment and really work in hard relationships where you're getting good criticism from a healthy, positive perspective.
Yeah, that's a very fair point, right? You don't projected criticism is probably not the type of criticism we want to hear, right? So now let's flip over to the good side. What it's kind of a positive thing that you find as a career builder?
So here's one I want to just jump out, which is one of my favorite ones. So you in your life have been told about the importance of having mentors. You know that people say, oh, it's so important to have mentors. So I want to take that word and let's just put it on a shelf for 1 second, and let's talk about a different word. And a different word I want to talk about is charity. So what is charity? Charity is giving without any receiving, right? We wouldn't work in a homeless shelter and then ask for a watch at the end. We're giving, we don't expect anything back. So it's one-sided. It typically is in a crisis situation. Like, if you were at your home and this Saturday night, girl comes banging on the door and her nose is bloody And she's like, my boyfriend just punched me in the face. And you're like, oh my gosh, like, let's get you in here, get you some medical treatment, right? So it's a crisis. And then charity tends to be short term, right? So like if that young lady showed up at your house every single Saturday night, at some point you're like, whoa, wait a minute, like there's something wrong here. So that's charity. Relationships are a healthy yin and yang. Like they're healthy giving and receiving, right? The art of a great conversation is, how are you? Look at me. How are you, right? If you have a relationship with someone and they never ask you how you're doing, they're not a good friend. And of course, that may be you. I don't mean you specifically, but like, it's a good thing for people to reflect on. I have a friend named John Martinez. I love asking John for advice. If I could just have him sit with me every day, I'd ask for advice. Sometimes truly, I call John and I say, how are you? And I just completely shut up, bite my lip, because I want to make sure our relationship stays, in balance, right? So charity, one-sided crisis, relationships, both ways. They're consistent, they're equal, and they also last forever. Relationships last forever. I was just in Scotland last week. I was the best man at a wedding for my buddy from 4th grade, right? So you have relationships last forever. So when you're advancing your career, do you want to have a mentor charity relationship or a mentor relationship? Okay. So there's a very big difference. So sometimes people want, it's like, oh, I want a senior person to pour into me and I'm just going to take that and go do my thing. Well, I'm telling you, that'll work for a little bit, but it won't last forever. If you see a senior person, you think, I want them to pour into me, and then I want to find ways to pour into them, that will last forever. That will bless you so much. And so sometimes I'm talking to young people, I'm like, look, if you're looking for capital, you're looking for advice, you're looking for contacts, you might think to yourself, well, what possibly could I give back? Figure it out. Write a handwritten thank you note, like their company on social media, ask them if you can cut their grass over the weekend, like, find ways to honor them, right? A quick story for you. I do a lot of work with Florida A&M, which is a historically Black college, great university in Tallahassee. And their president of the university asked a group of us to write some thank you notes to some politicians just for supporting the university. So I got my stationery out, wrote a little note. And honestly, I didn't even know who this guy was. I mean, dear State Senator, so thank you for supporting family. Really appreciate it, blah, blah, blah. So a few months later, a friend of mine's a lobbyist, and he was in the guy's office. He saw my note, my handwritten note, tacked to the guy's wall.
Wow.
Okay? So my buddy calls me. He's like, I can't believe that. So here's the question. Why did that happen? And I'll tell you why it happened. Because a state rep or a CEO or a principal, they don't get nice notes. No. They get criticized constantly. They get hate constantly. They get mean tweets constantly. And so when somebody slows down and stops and says, thank you for doing that, and acknowledges it, it's a big deal. And I will tell you this, that I meet all kinds of young professionals and college students. Most of them are like this. There's right here. And then there's this gap. And then there's this tiny percentage, it's like 4% that are like really amaze me, right? What's the difference between that? Is it that they went to Harvard for MBA or the degrees in nuclear physics? No, it's this little group. They write thank you notes. They invite me to be on their podcast. They're doing these extra things, and they're about helping and promoting other people, right? They're doing stuff, and I've had people that I've mentored that have become my clients, right? And I'm so, how does my ego feel about that? Honored. I feel so honored. And I think there'll be a 21-year-old I'll mentor this year, and 15 years from now, they'll be putting equity in a deal, and I'll be sending them reports every month, and I'm delighted to do that, right? But that concept of being in balanced relationship, I always tell young people, if you attend an event, who paid for it? Like there's food there, who paid for that food? Who paid for that air conditioning? Like whatever you're receiving, think about healthy giving. I'll tell you one last quick story on that. I got a friend of mine who is from the Bronx, and he sounds like it. Hey, Crossman, that's what he sounds like. And he was a cab driver, and now he still kind of drives a cab kind of thing. He's this tough street guy. And his family done a lot for my family. He's a blue collar working class guy. And so I gave him a gift card to a nice steak restaurant. I wanted him to have dinner on behalf of me. I gave it to him. 2 days later, package on my front doorstep, and it was some free tickets to go to SeaWorld, right? Wow. So here's like a blue collar guy I give a nice gift to, and he's gonna give back, right? I can't tell you how many times I've given gifts to people, and not that I expected it, but I never get anything back. I don't have a thank you note, right? That guy, man, I'll run through a brick wall for that guy, right? Because his maturity in seeing like, hey, we need to be in balance. There's a young man I helped out years ago. It's a long story, but just exceptional young guy, but he had been very much abused by his stepdad, and it was a terrible situation. And to this day, he and I spend time together. And as you might imagine, I have more income, I have more stuff than him. And he loves to see Marvel movies, and sometimes we'll go see these. I don't know which one's which. I don't know who Avenger, DC. People go crazy. They heard that.
Right.
I don't know which one's which. Okay, but he likes to see these movies. When we go see the movies, a lot of times he'll buy the tickets, and then I'll be like, "Well, hey, can I buy a hot dog?" And he'll be like, "No," and they're like, "Come on, let me buy a hot dog." Why is it that he insists on buying the tickets? Because he doesn't want to be a charity case. He wants to be in relationship with me.
Absolutely.
Not a charity to me, right? So that mindset, that's a big one.
Awesome. I love that. That's so incredible and so powerful. So what advice would you have for really anyone, young people, older people who want to start shifting that mindset? Where do you start, and what does that, that progress look like?
Well, I think that, of course, a lot of it has to do with what you put in your mind, right? Like what you're reading, what you're watching, what you're valuing, and what is influencing you. I will tell you that one of the things I started with my daughters really young was I always try to make the Publix cashier, the grocery store cashier laugh, right? And so I would always I'd have them they would be like 4 and 5 years old, and I'm checking out, and I'd turn around, look at them, and I'd say, "All right, I'm not buying you cigarettes again. Don't ask me anymore," and just get her to laugh or whatever. But my daughters, they catch on to it. And so now one of the things they do is we'll be buying something from a fast food place, and they'll always look at the cashier and they're like, "Oh, I love your nails." Like learning to just appreciate human beings. And so in a work environment, the receptionist here in my office, she's Hawaiian. And so every time something about Hawaii, I'm always like, "Oh, I just read this," honoring her, listening to people and connecting to people at all levels. It's whether it's the CEO or the janitor, knowing people's names and having that respect, right? So it's an awareness. It's awareness of your humanity when you're shopping. It's an awareness of humanity when you're working, and having compassion and caring about people in a very human way. And I'll tell you a simple one that I like is for anybody watching this that works at a big company. Let's just say they work at JLL or CBRE or wherever. Well, I'm sure that JLL has a thing where they're like, "Hey, the following people across the company got promotions," right? Man, sit down and at a minimum, just send every one of them an email and just congratulate them, right? Send a handwritten note, say congratulations, even if they got the promotion you wanted, right?
Yeah.
But being that person, I used to, when I lived for the Tremor Crow company, I used to do that, and people would email me back and say, "You're the only person," or "You're the only person that congratulated me," right?
Right.
That's a crazy thing. I'm on social media, and when my birthday comes up, I kid you not, I probably get 1,000 birthday something people.
Wow.
On social
I don't even
media.
know 1,000 people.
Yeah. Well, now here's what's funny is I absolutely wish 5,000 plus people happy birthday every year through social media, right?
Right.
So I'm on offense. I really try to do all I can to be honoring of people. And I know sometimes when I do that, I may be the only person that does that. I don't want to overwhelm anybody, but I think it starts with that mindset of just being aware and being relevant. One last thing, I'll tell you this, is this one of my favorite, it's one of my expressions, is that great leaders are relevant at a point of crisis, right? So if somebody in your office, man, they have a kid who gets arrested, be there for them and just listen to them. If they have a family member in the hospital, go visit them in the hospital. I have had people I know been in prison. I have gone to prison and visited people in prison, and I'm really glad I've done that. And go visit people in the hospital. That's a tough thing. It's a hard skill set to learn, but you can learn how to do that. If somebody's child is getting married, man, give them a little gift or send some sort of congratulations card. But I think, we always talk about when there's a fire in a building, everyone's running out, the firemen are running in. there's the same is true as like in business, like when tragedy strikes, people start disappearing, and then some other people, lean in. When I sold my company back in 2019, for a while there, I would joke, people say, "What are you doing?" I'd say, "I'm unemployed," and I actually enjoyed some solicitors would message me on LinkedIn. I'm like, "I'm retired," I just started messaging back. But my point of saying that to you is that, like, I learned very quickly who I could really depend on in my life and who I couldn't, because some people were done when they didn't see any power from me. Other people were still very much my friend, right? So I'm sensitive to people when they lose their jobs. I've known so many exceptional people who got laid off or whatever, and I always try to like pump them up and be there for them and support them. And people remember that. People remember through their life who was there for them, and be one of those people.
Awesome. I love that. That's so, so powerful. And those are all such, obviously finding time to go visit hotel or hospitals and prisons, up there in terms of giving. But the other things are very simple, right? It's so easy to send an email, take 30 seconds and say happy birthday on Facebook. I mean, Facebook literally reminds you whose birthday it is every day of your followers, right? Not hard to say happy birthday. I think they even have a pre-program where you can just like click a button and it says happy birthday to them. So these are the things that are simple yet go so far in making you memorable, really.
Yeah.
And
well, it's
and
also
mean a
thinking
lot to
about it.
people.
Yeah, it's also thinking just as simply a do unto others kind of a life mentality. Like what would you want people to do when you're going through tough stuff, and honing in that skill set and being there for them at whatever level that is. And you can find yourself really giving oxygen to people. A big part of the book, I talk about seeing professional counselors when needed. I mentioned about, I've seen a counselor, I've seen a psychiatrist, right? And making sure that there's no shame in that, and that we help to get people to the right resources, professional resources, and that we're practicing good mental health and being very real and encouraging to people.
Absolutely. I'm a huge, huge proponent of therapy of any kind, whether you're going to psychiatrist, counselor, like I have a life coach now. That's huge. There's a therapy component to that. All of that. I'm like the biggest proponent of that. Mental health is still undervalued and under talked about. Getting better, obviously, with our generation. So that's one thing we can definitely stake our claim on for sure, which
for
you
sure
talked about in the beginning, which I love. So I love that aspect for sure.
Absolutely.
So we are coming up close to time. I do have 5 questions that I ask all of my guests. It's the final 5. I'm excited for your answers.
I hope there's no math.
What's the best advice you've gotten from a mentor?
Oh, what's the best advice I've gotten from a mentor? I think I would say this. I was asking a guy who's mentored me about what were the top qualities of leadership, and his answer surprised me. He says number one answer was energy, having high energy. And I think that reflecting on that, of making sure I get proper rest, I stay in proper balance, because for me to be an impactful leader, I have to have the right energy. And I tend to work too hard, and I get in a bad place. I'm not in a good place mentally or whatever. And so really learning to take naps, and really learning to regulate, and not trying to be a competitive runner, or, so really valuing my energy. I would say it's a surprise one. Like there's others I could say are really important, but that's one I don't think I would ever come to that realization on my own.
I love that. That's so awesome. What is it about your career that makes you feel like you're fulfilling your why?
When I think about my why has to do with how much I value community. And that again comes from my dad, really valuing community. And sometimes you'll hear people say, we just need to love everybody. And then I'll say, well, what about people that voted for Trump? And then we'll go like, no, not them. And I'm like, well, guys, come on, right?
Right.
Are we going to love everybody? Or are we going to not love everybody? And so to me, when I think about community, I tell my kids, you can focus on principles or you can focus on power. If you focus on principles, you'll be willing to give up power. If you have power, sometimes you give up your principles. So as a human, I'm a Christian conservative Republican. I'm a very conservative guy. That said, if somebody comes up with a great idea and they're a liberal Democrat, man, I will jump and help and support that idea. So when you put the impact to my why, it's like I have a real sense of community, and I have a real sense of like trying to make an impact in my community where people are at most need. So when I think about, we talk about mental health, suicide awareness, I like picking hard topics, leaning in. I talk a lot about race. I do a lot of work on the subject of race, do a lot of work with historically Black colleges. And I really, really enjoy, value helping impact my community in that space. And I feel like I have a unique niche, and that's very fulfilling.
I love that. That's so awesome. And so powerful to give back to those things, especially like you mentioned, you like to lean into some of the harder topics, which a lot of people don't like to discuss, but obviously still very, very important. You know, the irony of this whole red versus blue thing is that we all really do want the same things.
Right.
When it comes down to it, and without getting too political, but yeah, I mean, ultimately we all actually want the same things, and you know, the fighting is what keeps things from really changing. But we could do a whole episode just on that.
real quick, look, I've been appointed by a governor, a senator, a mayor of a city, a mayor of a county, and I'm honored. All four of those appointments honored, 2 Republican, 2 Democrat, and I feel really proud of that. And of course, Democrats know how conservative I am, but they know that I will put the work over anything else. And so that's the human I want to be. That's the human I want to be.
Awesome. I love that. That's so awesome. What's your favorite non-real estate or investment related book?
Say the non-investment related book. Let's see. I really love Malcolm Gladwell, right? So I don't know if that qualifies in that space, but I really, really have enjoyed his stuff. It has really, really helped me. And then I don't want to get too churchy, but like definitely Proverbs in the Bible has really helped me. And I'll tell you a funny one, because I'm speaking at a Christian event next month, and they asked me like, "What's your title of your lecture?" And I'm going to do it on Joseph, the CEO of the Old Testament. Wow. And I love the story of Old Testament Joseph, and like regardless of your faith, he's a great story. His whole life, his experience, what he went through, and he was a guy that did things right and then went to jail and all this kind of stuff. But there's a lot that I gleaned from it. I'll tell you one real quick. He was a dreamer, and I'm a dreamer. A lot of CEOs are dreamers, but he talked about his dreams way too much to the wrong people, and his siblings sold him into slavery and threw him in a well. So I always tell people, like, look, I've had to learn. I'm a dreamer, but not everybody wants to hear my dreams, right? Yep. So I'm going to be discerning about what I share with. So that's just one of my favorite ones.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm not a religious person, but there is a lot to be learned, especially Proverbs. I've had a couple people actually mention how much they like that. Especially from a business standpoint, there's a lot of like business, you know, like fundamentals and principles in there that transfer outside of religion.
Well, you want to hear a funny one, because just sort of time here, but you talked about anxiety, and let me ask you a question. Did Jesus suffer from anxiety?
I mean, the obvious answer seems like yes.
Well, the answer is totally yes. So when he was in the Garden of Gethsemane, the night before he's going to get crucified, you know, he was sweating so heavily, it was like drips of blood. And so to me, it's like sometimes we can do this with people, just like we can do this with faith. We're putting like, oh my gosh, this person's infallible, or what crazy things. But to me, it's like Christ's humanity, that he suffered from anxiety. So like, well, gosh, if he suffered from anxiety and you and I are suffering from anxiety, we're not crazy. Like that's a normal feeling. It's a normal feeling. It's okay. Like Absolutely. It's a normal feeling to have. And you can express that, and people can say, hey, that makes sense that you're feeling that because you're working on this big deal, or you've got a big move you're making across the country. That is you're not a bad human, or you're not a bad Christian. You're not a bad whatever because you feel anxiety.
Right. Feelings are not good or bad. It's the actions that we take that define them. Sure. If you could have any superpower, what would it be?
The superpower would be, this would be very easy for me. Be the gift of healing.
Ooh, nice.
I
like that.
If I could, if I could heal my wife, who has a very serious illness, if I could heal, I see so much. I'll get emotional if I talk about it. I feel a lot of empathy, and I just see so much suffering. I see a lot of people. It's like when Will Smith slapped Chris Rock. Like, part of what I was dealing like in my mind immediately, it's like, man, how much pain must be going on inside Will Smith? He must be hurting. And it's such a classic example of the human experience.
Yeah.
Here is Will Smith getting the highest. I mean, he is in the top ring of celebritydom ever in the history of our planet.
He's one of the greatest.
In the outer top. It's the biggest night of his life. And clearly something is way off. It's like, guys, you could win a Super Bowl. You could win an Academy Award. You could win a Grammy. You could be an astronaut in space. We could name on and on and on. It still does not heal that humanity painful thing. So healing, helping people heal that's a good thing.
Awesome. I love that. That's the first time we've gotten that answer. That's incredible. And, it's too bad, especially too, because everything that, when you're a celebrity, everything you do is in the spotlight. So that just kind of, compounds for sure. Awesome. Last one. What's the best way for people to get a hold of you and learn more?
Oh, well, they could follow me on LinkedIn for sure. That's very easy. I try to be very accessible. So I'm on LinkedIn. You can share all my social media handles. I do get back to everybody reaches out to me. So yeah, I guess I'd say LinkedIn. You can certainly go to my website and reach out to me there. But and I'm happy to be a resource and an advocate. I hope to be able to help people. I will say this, that obviously my book's for sale and you can buy it audio. I honest to goodness, a guy who is in the NFL told me that every season he drives to a city from where he lives to where he's going for training camp. He listens to my book on audio on the way. That's a sweet story, right? But here's the deal. If you or anybody you think, gosh, John, your book would be great for them, but they can't afford it or you can't afford it, you email me, I'll send you a copy. Okay?
Awesome. I love that so
That's
much.
what I want to be. I want to be somebody that's trying to be a helpful resource.
John, this has been amazing. Honestly, this is to not get too emotional, but a lot of emotion here. So I'll just say, honestly, that's why I love the open forum podcast, right? Like if you saw my notes, I don't have an agenda. And that's why I do it, because you never know what's going to happen. And we didn't even talk about real estate, but
oh, no.
so powerful. And that means more to me. And I hope that means more to my listeners as well than, just sitting there talking about market research all the time. So I appreciate it very much. Thank you for sharing all of this and for your time.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me. And I hope you'll let me know what I can do to help you in the future. Please see me as a resource.
Likewise. Hey guys, thank you so much for watching today's episode. I hope you really enjoyed it. Listen, I know it's cliche and you hear it all the time, but please don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you know when the next video is coming out. Even though this is technically a daily podcast, it's coming out the next day. We have a ton of content coming your way. So please like and subscribe. It helps a ton. Leave comments. Would love to know what you guys think. And we will see you on the next one. Thanks so much.